Imagine surviving a plane crash at age 8 that steals your mother and sister, only to have your father help you rebuild your life around a shared dream. Then, just 9 days after achieving that dream, you find yourself in another plane, falling from the sky again. This is the staggering true story of Austin Hatch, the boy who lost 2 families in 2 separate plane crashes and survived the unsurvivable, only to wake from a coma to a world of unimaginable grief and a body that no longer worked. It's a story not about tragedy, but about the relentless power of the human spirit to find hope in the absolute darkest of places. Welcome to the dark chapters. In the world of sports, we are drawn to stories of comeback and resilience. We celebrate athletes who overcome a single devastating injury to return to the game they love. But there are some stories that transcend the realm of sports. Stories of survival so profound, so staggeringly improbable, force us to question the very nature of fate and the limitless strength of the human spirit. This is the story of Austin Hatch. A young man who seemed destined for greatness, only to have his world shattered not once, but twice, in the twisted wreckage of a small airplane. It is a story of incomprehensible loss, miraculous survival, and the grueling, agonizing journey back to a life he was never supposed to have. Before the crashes, before the comas and the endless rehabilitation, Austin Hatch's life was idyllic, the embodiment of a loving, all-American family. Growing up in Fort Wayne, Indiana, he was the youngest child of Dr. Stephen and Julie Hatch. His father was a successful anesthesiologist, a passionate and charismatic man who lived life with an infectious zeal. His mother, Julie, was the warm, steady heart of the family. Austin had 2 older siblings, Ian and Lindsay, and the 5 of them were a tight-knit unit, bound by shared faith, love, and 2 great passions that dominated their lives: basketball and flying. Dr. Stephen Hatch was not just a doctor. He was an accomplished pilot. He owned a single-engine Beechcraft Bonanza, and flying was the family's preferred mode of travel. It was their magic carpet, whisking them away on vacations and to visit family, turning routine trips into adventures. For Austin, the cockpit of his father's plane was a second home. He would sit beside his dad for hours, watching him navigate the skies, mesmerized by the complex dance of dials and gauges, learning the language of aviation. The experience forged an unbreakable bond between father and son, a shared love for the freedom and perspective found above the clouds. On the ground, their other passion was basketball. Indiana is a state where basketball is less a sport and more a religion, and the Hatch family were devout followers. Austin inherited his father's love for the game and showed immense promise from a young age. He was a talented player, known for his work ethic and a pure, beautiful shooting stroke. His ultimate dream, a dream he shared with his dad, was to one day play basketball for the University of Michigan, his father's beloved alma mater. Every night, the 2 of them would work in the driveway, Stephen rebounding for Austin as he practiced shot after shot, perfecting his form under the garage lights, both of them dreaming of the day he would wear the maize and blue. In the late summer of 2003, the family was preparing for their annual trip to their summer cottage on Walloon Lake in northern Michigan. It was a cherished tradition, a final getaway before the start of a new school year. 8-year-old Austin was excited. On September 1st, they loaded up the Beechcraft Bonanza at their local airport in Fort Wayne. The plan was for Stephen to fly his wife and 2 younger children, Austin and Lindsay, up to Michigan first, and then return later for his oldest son, Ian, who had a commitment he couldn't miss. The flight was routine, just like dozens they had taken before, but as they prepared to land at the small municipal airport in Charlevoix, Michigan, something went terribly wrong. On the final approach, the aircraft clipped a power line. The collision sent a catastrophic jolt through the plane. The engine stalled, and the small aircraft, suddenly stripped of its power, plummeted from the sky. It crashed into a utility pole and then slammed into a residential garage, before erupting in a violent explosion of flame and twisted metal. In the space of a heartbeat, Austin Hatch's perfect world was incinerated. The impact was devastating. The crash instantly killed his 11-year-old sister Lindsay and his 38-year-old mother Julie. Austin was thrown from the wreckage, but he was alive. His father Stephen was also thrown clear, suffering severe burns but miraculously surviving. First responders arrived to a scene of absolute horror. Amidst the chaos and the flames, they found a small boy, conscious but in shock, and his grievously injured father. The immediate aftermath was a blur of pain, confusion, and unfathomable grief. Austin and his father were rushed to the hospital, where they began the slow, agonizing process of physical and emotional recovery. For a young boy of 8, the news was delivered in staggered, incomprehensible blows. His sister was gone. His mother was gone. The 2 people who had just been sitting beside him in the familiar comfort of their family plane had vanished from his life forever. The loss was a wound so deep it seemed impossible to fathom. The family of 5 was now a shattered family of 3. Austin, his father, and his older brother Ian, who had been spared only by the cruel lottery of fate that kept him back in Indiana that day. The ensuing investigation by the National Transportation Safety Board would cite pilot error as a contributing factor. A heavy burden for a grieving father and husband to bear. In the wake of the tragedy, Stephen Hatch had to do the impossible. While recovering from his own severe injuries and grappling with an ocean of guilt and sorrow, he had to guide his 2 surviving sons through the darkness. The dream of a happy family, the life they had known, had been wiped away in a fiery instant. All that was left was survival. For Austin Hatch, this was the first time he had looked death in the face and walked away. It would not be the last. Out of the fire and twisted metal of the first crash, a new, fragile life began for the surviving members of the Hatch family. The physical wounds were severe, but they were nothing compared to the gaping chasm of grief that had torn their world apart. For 8-year-old Austin, the loss of his mother and younger sister was a constant, phantom ache. For his older brother Ian, it was a surreal nightmare compounded by the guilt of having been spared by a twist of fate. And for their father, Dr. Stephen Hatch, the burden was almost incomprehensible. He had lost his wife and his daughter in a crash where he was the pilot, a fact that would haunt him for the rest of his days. Yet, in the face of this soul-crushing tragedy, Stephen Hatch made a conscious, heroic choice. He would not let his family drown in sorrow. He would dedicate every ounce of his being to his 2 surviving sons, and together they would build a new life from the ashes of the old one. The recovery was a slow, arduous process. Stephen's burns were severe, requiring painful treatments and skin grafts, but his focus was singular: Austin. The bond between them, already strong, was now forged in the crucible of shared trauma and survival. They were more than just father and son. They were the only 2 people on Earth who truly understood what had been lost on that terrible September day. Stephen's love for his boys became his reason for living. He poured all his energy into creating a stable, loving environment for them, ensuring that despite the immense hole in their lives, they felt safe and supported. In this new reality, their shared passions became their therapy. Flying, the activity that had brought them so much joy and so much pain, was understandably put aside. But basketball became their sanctuary. It was the one thing that connected their new life to the old one, a tangible link to the happy days in the driveway. The court became a place where grief could be channeled into sweat, focus, and purpose. For Austin, putting a basketball in his hands was like coming home. The familiar feel of the leather, the rhythm of the dribble, the satisfying swish of the net. It was a language he understood, a world where the rules were clear and the chaos of his emotions could be momentarily silenced. Stephen nurtured this passion with everything he had. He became Austin's coach, his biggest supporter, and his constant companion on the basketball journey. They spent countless hours in the gym, Stephen rebounding, teaching, and pushing his son to be the best he could be. It was more than just about sports. It was about rebuilding a dream, the dream that Austin would one day play for the University of Michigan. The dream he had once shared with his mother and sister now became a powerful, unifying goal for this shattered family. It was a light in the darkness, a reason to get up every morning and fight. And fight Austin did. As he grew, his talent on the court blossomed. He developed into a formidable player, a star at his school, Canterbury High in Fort Wayne. He wasn't just good, he was exceptional. A 6'6" shooting guard with a lethal three-point shot and an ironclad work ethic, he began to attract the attention of college scouts from across the country. He became a nationally ranked prospect, a name that appeared on the recruiting lists of top-tier basketball programs. But for Austin, there was only ever one school. His heart was set on Michigan. This journey was not just his own. Stephen, in an effort to rebuild his own life and provide a complete family for his sons, eventually found love again. He met a woman named Kimberly, who bravely stepped into the role of stepmother to two boys who had endured an unimaginable loss. She embraced them completely, and together, the four of them, Stephen, Kimberly, Ian, and Austin, began to form a new family. It was different, a mosaic pieced together from broken parts, but it was filled with love, laughter, and a profound sense of hope. They were moving forward, proving that life could and would go on. The culmination of all their hard work and dedication arrived on June 15, 2011. It was the day the dream became a reality. Austin, having just completed his sophomore year of high school, received a formal scholarship offer to play basketball for the University of Michigan. The head coach, John Beilein, had been impressed not just by Austin's skill, but by his character, his maturity, and the incredible resilience he had shown throughout his young life. For the Hatch family, it was a moment of pure, unadulterated joy. It was the fulfillment of a promise made in a driveway years ago, a testament to a father's unwavering love and a son's unbreakable spirit. They had overcome the darkness. They had stared into the abyss and had clawed their way back into the light. The future, once again, looked bright. To celebrate this monumental achievement, Stephen planned a trip. It was a familiar one, a flight from Fort Wayne to their beloved summer cottage in northern Michigan. For 8 years since the first crash, the family had avoided flying in small planes. But Stephen, ever the pragmatist, had decided it was time. He had purchased a new plane, a larger, more powerful Pilatus PC-12. He had logged hundreds of hours of additional flight training, determined to be the safest pilot he could be. The family was whole again, the dream was secured, and it felt like the right time to reclaim that part of their lives. 9 days after accepting his scholarship to Michigan, on June 24, 2011, Austin, his father, and his stepmother Kimberly loaded up the new plane. They were heading north for a weekend of celebration. The sky was clear. The future was limitless. They were a family reborn, flying toward a horizon of hope, completely unaware that fate, in its cruelest and most inexplicable twist, was waiting for them in the sky once more. The flight on June 24, 2011 was supposed to be a triumph, a symbolic victory lap. It was the closing of a painful chapter and the celebration of a new beginning. 8 years had passed since the first crash, 8 years of rebuilding, grieving, and fighting their way back to a life of normalcy and hope. In the cockpit of the new Pilatus PC-12, a powerful and modern aircraft, Dr. Stephen Hatch was not the same pilot he had been in 2003. He had dedicated himself to mastering this new plane, undergoing extensive training to ensure such a tragedy could never happen again. Beside him sat his son, Austin, no longer a small, innocent boy, but a 16-year-old star athlete, a Michigan Wolverine in waiting, his future shining brilliantly before him. In the back sat his wife and Austin's stepmother, Kimberly, the woman who had bravely and lovingly helped piece their broken family back together. The sky above Fort Wayne was clear, the mood was celebratory, and the flight to their Michigan cottage was a journey back to a place of happy memories, now imbued with a profound sense of accomplishment. As they flew north, everything felt different from that fateful day 8 years earlier. The Pilatus was a far more sophisticated and stable aircraft than the old Beechcraft Bonanza. The flight was smooth, the conversation easy and filled with excitement about the future. They talked about Michigan basketball, about the cottage, about the life that awaited them. For Austin, it was a moment of pure contentment. He had overcome the unimaginable. He had his father, his new mother, his brother Ian waiting for them, and the dream he had worked for his entire life was finally within his grasp. He was safe, he was loved, he was whole again. Their destination was the same small airport in Charlevoix, Michigan, the very place where their world had been shattered before. But this time was meant to be different. This was an act of reclamation, of staring down the ghost of their past and conquering it. As Stephen began the approach to the runway, however, the familiar landscape below became the setting for a terrifying and inexplicable case of cosmic déjà vu. Once again, on the final approach, something went catastrophically wrong. The NTSB investigation would later conclude that Stephen Hatch, for reasons that remain unclear, attempted to execute a non-standard instrument approach. He flew too low and too fast. In the final moments, as the plane descended toward the runway, he seemed to realize his error. Instead of landing, he attempted a go-around, a maneuver to abort the landing and circle back for another attempt. But it was too late. The plane was not properly configured for the sudden climb. He stalled the aircraft. The powerful engine of the Pilatus, which should have been their salvation, went silent as the plane lost aerodynamic lift. For the second time in his young life, Austin Hatch felt the gut-wrenching sensation of a plane falling out of the sky. The crash was violent and absolute. The Pilatus slammed into the garage of a private home less than half a mile from the airport runway, the same airport, the same town where his mother and sister had perished. The impact was catastrophic, a brutal explosion of force that tore the aircraft apart. In the front of the plane, Stephen and Kimberly Hatch were killed instantly. Their new life together, their shared future, was extinguished in the same cruel, random instant as the one before. In the rear of the cabin, 16-year-old Austin Hatch was thrown violently against the interior of the plane. The human body is not meant to withstand such forces. He suffered a traumatic brain injury, his brain swelling violently against the inside of his skull. His collarbone was fractured, his ribs were shattered, and one of his lungs was punctured. He was battered, broken, and bleeding, but by a miracle that defies all logical explanation, he was alive. Once again, he was the sole survivor. First responders arriving at the scene were met with a horrific and eerily familiar sight. The twisted, smoldering wreckage of a small plane, the smell of jet fuel hanging heavy in the air. Inside the mangled fuselage, they found Austin, unconscious, clinging to life by the thinnest of threads. He was immediately airlifted to a hospital, his condition critical. He was placed in a medically induced coma to allow the severe swelling in his brain a chance to subside. For the second time, his family, his brother Ian, his grandparents, his aunts and uncles, rushed to a hospital bedside praying for a miracle. For 8 weeks, Austin lay suspended between life and death. In the silent, dreamless world of the coma, he was unaware of the new tragedy that had befallen him. He didn't know that the father who had been his rock, his coach, his fellow survivor, was gone. He didn't know that the stepmother who had so lovingly helped heal their family was also dead. He was alone, his body fighting a desperate battle for survival, while his mind was mercifully shielded from the fresh hell that awaited him. The world outside his hospital room held its breath. The story of the boy who had survived a second plane crash became national news. It was a story so improbable, so drenched in tragedy, it seemed like a cruel fiction. How could one person, one family, endure so much? For the University of Michigan basketball program, the news was devastating. Coach John Byline and the entire team were heartbroken, but they made a promise. They announced that Austin's scholarship offer was unconditional. It didn't matter if he could ever play basketball again. He was part of the Michigan family, and his scholarship would be honored no matter what. It was an extraordinary gesture of loyalty and compassion, a small beacon of light in an overwhelmingly dark time. Finally, after 2 long months, doctors slowly began to ease him out of the coma. His emergence back into consciousness was not a sudden awakening, but a slow, confusing, and painful crawl. His brain, so severely injured, struggled to make sense of the world. He couldn't speak, he couldn't move. He didn't know where he was or what had happened. It was in this fragile, terrifying state that he had to be told the news. His father was gone. Kimberly was gone. The words, delivered gently by his grieving family, were a blow more devastating than any physical injury. The darkness that he had fought so hard to escape for 8 years had returned, blacker and more absolute than ever before. He had survived the unsurvivable, only to wake up completely and utterly alone. Waking from a coma is not like it is in the movies. There is no gentle flutter of eyelids, no sudden return to clarity. For Austin Hatch, it was a slow, terrifying crawl out of a black abyss into a disorienting fog of pain and confusion. His body, once the finely tuned instrument of a star athlete, was a broken vessel. His mind, the very seat of his identity, was a shattered landscape. The traumatic brain injury had reset his world to zero. He couldn't walk, he couldn't talk, he couldn't feed himself. He was trapped inside a body that refused to obey his commands, able to understand the world around him, but unable to communicate his fear, his frustration, or his profound sorrow. It was in this state of absolute helplessness that the full weight of his new reality descended upon him. The father who had been his rock was gone. The stepmother who had healed his family was gone. He had woken from one nightmare, only to find himself in the heart of another, one that was colder, lonelier, and more permanent than any he had ever imagined. The road back from that abyss was not measured in weeks or months, but in millimeters and seconds. It was a journey that would test the very limits of human endurance. After being stabilized, Austin was transferred to a specialized rehabilitation facility. Here his new life began, a grueling, monotonous cycle of physical, occupational, and speech therapy. Every day was a battle. The simple act of sitting up in bed was an exhausting, monumental achievement. Learning to form a word with his lips was a frustrating exercise that often ended in tears. He had to relearn the most basic functions of life, the things a toddler takes for granted. Each small victory, holding a fork, tying a shoe, speaking a single coherent sentence, was a testament to his incredible will and the tireless dedication of his therapists and his family. While his body fought to heal, his heart was drowning in an ocean of grief. The loss of his father was a wound that cut deeper than any physical injury. Stephen Hatch had been more than a parent. He was his coach, his mentor, his best friend, and his fellow survivor. He was the one person on Earth who truly understood the trauma of the first crash. Now, Austin had to face the echoes of that trauma and the fresh horror of the new one, completely on his own. There were days of profound despair, days when the sheer injustice of it all was a weight too heavy to bear, days when giving up seemed like the only logical response. But in those darkest moments, Austin would find a flicker of light, a reason to keep fighting. He was not entirely alone. His surviving family rallied around him with fierce, unwavering love. His brother, Ian, his grandparents, and his extended family created a fortress of support. They made the decision to move him to California to be closer to them, ensuring he was never without a familiar, loving face during the grueling rehabilitation process. And then there was his other family, the one waiting for him in Ann Arbor. Coach John Bylan and the University of Michigan basketball program remained a constant, powerful presence in his life. Coach Bylan would call him regularly, not to talk about basketball, but just to talk about life, to check in, to remind him that he was still a part of their team. He told Austin, "Your scholarship is safe. You are a Michigan man, no matter what. Just focus on getting better. We are waiting for you." This promise was more than just a scholarship. It was a lifeline. It was a purpose. It gave Austin a goal to strive for, a future to believe in when his present was filled with nothing but pain and struggle. Slowly, miraculously, Austin began to put the pieces back together. The first time he stood on his own 2 feet, his legs shaking uncontrollably, was a victory celebrated like a championship. The first time he was able to walk down a hallway without assistance was a marathon. And then came the day he first held a basketball again. The familiar feel of the pebbled leather in his hands was a comfort, but the act of trying to play was a source of profound frustration. The star athlete, the sharp shooter who could drain three-pointers with effortless grace, was gone. In his place was a young man who struggled to dribble, whose shots barely reached the rim, whose body and mind were no longer in sync. Many would have quit. Many would have accepted that the dream of playing major college basketball was a casualty of the crashes. But Austin Hatch was not like many people. He approached his basketball rehabilitation with the same grit and determination that he approached learning to walk again. He spent hours in the gym, painstakingly rebuilding his skills from the ground up. He would shoot hundreds of free throws, his form awkward, his strength diminished, but his focus absolute. The basketball court was no longer about chasing athletic glory. It was about reclaiming his life. Every made shot was a defiant blow against the fate that had tried to destroy him. It was a promise he was keeping to his father, a way to honor the memory of all the hours they had spent together in the driveway. He returned to high school in California, a stranger in a new land, a junior trying to navigate a world that had been turned upside down. He played on the school's basketball team, but he was a shadow of his former self. He was no longer the star, but a role player coming off the bench. Yet, every time he stepped onto the court, it was a miracle. Every point he scored was a testament to his unbreakable spirit. He was no longer just playing a game. He was telling a story of resilience, a story that inspired his teammates, his school, and everyone who heard it. He was proving that even after being broken twice, he could not be defeated. The darkness had tried to swallow him whole, but Austin Hatch was choosing to walk back into the light, one painful, courageous step at a time. In the fall of 2014, 3 years after the second crash, Austin Hatch did something that ranked among the greatest miracles of his story. He walked onto the campus of the University of Michigan as a freshman student and a member of its storied basketball team. The journey to that moment had been a monumental testament to his will. He had graduated from high school, having painstakingly rebuilt his academic and physical abilities from the ground up. He was no longer the nationally ranked superstar he had been destined to become, but he had arrived. He had fulfilled the dream. He was a Michigan man, just as his father had always known he would be, just as Coach Bylan had promised. His arrival in Ann Arbor was a celebration, but it was also the beginning of a new, difficult reality. The physical gap between the player Austin was and the player he needed to be to compete at the elite Division I level was immense. The traumatic brain injury had left him with lingering balance issues and a body that simply couldn't move with the speed and agility required. In practice, he worked harder than anyone, pushing his recovering body to its absolute limits. His teammates, who had followed his story with awe, embraced him completely. They saw his daily struggle, the grit and determination it took for him just to complete the drills, and they were profoundly inspired. He quickly became the heart and soul of the team, a living, breathing example of what it means to persevere. However, both Austin and Coach Bylan eventually had to confront a painful truth. The dream of him being a significant contributor on the court was not realistic. Playing at that level posed a significant risk to his long-term health, and his physical limitations prevented him from keeping pace. In a moment of incredible maturity and self-awareness, Austin made a difficult decision. After his freshman year, he announced that he would be giving up his spot on the active roster, transitioning to a medical scholarship and becoming a student assistant coach. He was not quitting. He was redefining his role. He realized that his greatest contribution to the team would not be with his scoring, but with his story. He could serve the team and his university in a much more powerful way. As a student assistant, he found a new purpose. He worked with the coaches, helped mentor younger players, and became a constant source of perspective and inspiration for his teammates. On days when players were frustrated by a tough loss or complaining about a grueling practice, a single glance at Austin Hatch was all it took to remind them of the privilege they had to simply be on that court. He taught them that the game was about more than just winning. It was about gratitude, effort, and cherishing every single moment. But his playing career at Michigan was not entirely over. There would be one final, perfect moment on the court. On December 30, 2014, Michigan was playing an exhibition game. In the final minutes, with the game well in hand, Coach Bylan called Austin's name. The entire arena, which knew his story, rose to its feet in a wave of thunderous applause. Austin Hatch, wearing the maize and blue uniform he had dreamed of his entire life, checked into a college basketball game. A few moments later, he was fouled. He stepped to the free throw line, the arena silent with anticipation. He took a deep breath, went through the familiar motion he had practiced hundreds of thousands of times in his driveway with his father, and released the ball. It sailed through the air and dropped cleanly through the net. The crowd erupted. It was only 1 point in an unimportant game, but it was one of the most meaningful moments in the history of Michigan basketball. It was the culmination of his journey, a point scored for his mother, his sister, his father, and his stepmother. It was a perfect, cinematic ending to his playing career. After that game, Austin focused on his new path. He excelled academically, graduating from the University of Michigan in 2018 with a degree in organizational studies. His basketball family remained by his side every step of the way. When he got married to his college sweetheart, Abby, the entire Michigan basketball team and coaching staff were there to celebrate with him. Today, Austin Hatch is not defined by the two tragedies that tried to break him. He has become a powerful and sought-after motivational speaker, traveling the country to share his incredible story. He speaks to corporations, sports teams, and community groups, not as a victim, but as a survivor who has learned profound lessons about life's true priorities. His message is one of gratitude, resilience, and what he calls the grit and gratitude mindset. He challenges his audiences to confront their own obstacles, to cherish their relationships, and to never take a single day for granted. He does not dwell on the why, the incomprehensible question of why one person should have to endure so much loss. Instead, he focuses on the what now. He has taken the unimaginable pain of his past and transformed it into a powerful force for good in the world. He is a living testament to the idea that our lives are not defined by what happens to us, but by how we choose to respond. Austin Hatch could have been a story of tragedy. He could have been consumed by bitterness and despair, and the world would have understood. But he chose a different path. He chose to honor the memory of the family he lost by living a life of purpose, courage, and unwavering hope. He is no longer just the boy who survived 2 plane crashes. He is Austin Hatch, a husband, a leader, and a symbol of hope for anyone, anywhere, who is struggling to find their way out of the darkness. Austin Hatch's journey is one of the most powerful testaments to resilience you will ever hear. It forces us to ask what we are truly capable of when faced with impossible odds. His life is a lesson in gratitude, perseverance, and the choice to build a future of purpose, no matter how much has been taken from you. If you are moved by this incredible story of the human will to survive, please subscribe and click the bell for more chapters of hope and inspiration. Share this story with someone who needs to be reminded that our deepest scars can become our greatest strengths.